Hello everyone, Ember here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one I'm going to be taking a look at a bunch of new reveals from the sets Ancient Roar and Future Flash, which of course are going to be Paradox Rift in the West this November. So pretty long title of phrases there, but we basically just have a bunch of new cards to take a look at, including an awful lot of EX Pokemon actually. So Pokemon's basically just going full steam ahead with the new card reveals. I'm super excited to see how the set turns out, to be honest, because in all honesty, the set is looking really good so far. There's an awful lot of playable cards, and this reveal only really cements that, to be honest. So, first up, we actually have to take a look at a Toedscool. I know, super interesting. But basically, this Toedscool's first attack, Sticky Spore, basically allows you to attach your basic grass energy from your hand to one of your bench Pokemon. And why this is actually worth mentioning in the first place is, of course, because of Toedscool EX. This card isn't like super broken or anything. I mean, the artwork is, of course, lovely. But, at the end of the day, this is just a nice quality of life change, basically, to the Toedscool EX deck. And that's why I thought it was worth mentioning. But, moving aside, we have the new Toedscool. Also, you'll see a running theme with today's card reveals. All of them basically just have an art rare, which is great. I love art rares. So that's something nice to bear in mind. But basically, the Toedscool that is coming out has this ability Mycelium Colony, which is basically a anti-superior energy retrieval card and not much else really. I guess you could use this against stuff like Clara, really, and Tulip, but I don't think anyone's really playing those cards at the minute. I think this could be super, super good if, a deck that was relying on retrieving energy and stuff and Pokemon from the disco pile was really competitive. So if Chien-Pao ever rose to be like a S tier deck for some reason, then this Toedscool could be like a 1-1 line in a competitive deck, like Arceus, for example. But in all honesty, outside of that, I don't think this card is, super great. But I have to see how it does in the future. Then we have a Magby, which is super good news. So it basically confirms that they're going to continue baby Pokemon for the foreseeable future. Does have some amazing artwork. I think this is worth, getting just for the artwork alone. Even if the attack is super lackluster, Gradual Heater just says if this Pokemon is damaged or even knocked out during your opponent's next turn, place 6 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon, which is a bit subpar. 60 damage for essentially no energy is, of course, very efficient. But at the same time, Magmy is a 30 HP Pokemon, so it's almost always going to be KO'd for whatever reason. So yeah, being a pivot as well is nice, but unfortunately, I don't think this card is super great, but I'll definitely be picking one of these up for the binder, as many people probably will be, just because the artwork is amazing, and of course, it's a Magby card, so nice to see. Then we have even more Charcadets, because there wasn't enough of these already, but we do have one with Protect, which is really nice, I guess, so a nice Charcadet upgrade. There's also one with the attack Fiery Spirit, which is actually quite nice. It also has 8 HP, which is, pretty decent. And that is fairly relevant because there is, in fact, an Armarouge EX. So Ceruledge fans are not eating well today. But 260 HP, Stage 1 Fire type, has the ability Crimson Armor, super cool name. Says when this Pokemon is at full HP, it takes 80 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. So basically, this is just Scizor GX all over again, if you're familiar with Scizor GX from the Sun and Moon era. So a pretty strong ability overall, stuff like Arceus that would naturally do 180 with a double turbo, now just does 100, so they're not even two-shotting you at that point, which is great, of course, assuming you heal off, of course, but, stuff like Cramorant, for example, is only doing 30 damage, so you could then get Potion involved at that point, and you wouldn't be taking any damage, 80 less the next turn, so in all, I think this ability is actually pretty strong. It's definitely one of the reasons why I think this card could be pretty good in the end, just because of the ability is very strong in the early game. Of course, there isn't like many super great healing options, so you won't be able to take advantage of this ability more than once, I think, per Armarouge, but still a decent ability nonetheless. And then the attack, Scorching Bazooka for 2 colorless, but it's basically just 2 fire. Does 40 damage and then 40 more for each fire energy attaches Pokemon. So it's basically sent to Scorch VMAX, but on a much smaller scale, I guess, because it's not accelerating to itself. But still a really strong attack. And of course, you can pair this up with like the single prize Armarouge and Magma Basin. So you can Magma Basin to a bench Pokemon. And then you don't want to use Magma Basin on Armarouge EX because then you would nullify the ability, assuming you didn't already have damage counters on already. But you get what I'm saying here. You can just Magma Base into a bench and then single prize Armarouge energy up. Now, that is easier said than done, funny enough. It does sound pretty easy to do because you're still using the same evolution line, but I can imagine that getting a bit fiddly and maybe a bit too slow for current standard, maybe. But there is other options. There's, of course, like the Arceus Armarouge variant that did see play for a little bit. There's also one variant that I've had in mind where you use stuff like the Sada supporter to accelerate energy to your benched Paradox Pokemon, and then you can move them to the active spot with the single prize Armarouge. So it's basically just cutting out Magma Basin in favor of, Paradox support Pokemon, I guess. But yeah, I don't think this card is terrible, in all honesty. It's nothing too crazy, but, it's not bad either. Definitely pretty decent. And then we have some amazing Wimpod artwork, very pirate ship themed esque, but always nice to see new Wimpods because it means new Glissopods. And I was a big fan of Golisopod GX back in the day, so it's nice to see Golisopod get an EX Pokemon, even though it's maybe not the best. For 1 water, 2 colors, strategic retreat does 170, and then you discard energy from this Pokemon. If you do, switch Golisopod with one of your benched. So a pretty decent attack because you will 2-hit KO any Pokemon in the game. And you can, of course, just discard a water. You don't have to discard double turbo. And then if you do, you just switch Golisopod with something like a Mimikyu, I think, is probably the best option there is right now. You could go for like Klefki or something, but in all honesty, I think Mimikyu is definitely the best choice, or something like Radiant Jirachi, maybe even. But yeah, certainly not the worst attack in the world. It could definitely see some limited play, maybe in like a Palkia V-Star kind of box deck, but this obviously isn't going to like outclass Chien-Pao unless you start involving Mimikyu, because it's basically just worse Chien-Pao without it. But in all honesty, I think this card could be super fun. Maybe I'm a bit biased because I really like Golisopod, but yeah, I think this card is pretty decent overall. Next up, though, is we have a single prize Veluza, which is always nice to see. And once again, some amazing art rares, which is going to hurt credit-wise, to be honest. But yeah, this Veluza, very strong in GLC, and also could be pretty decent in Standard, actually. Does have the ability Cut for the Job, which basically allows you to conserve 2 energy from Veluza when it gets KO'd. So it's basically like a double AXP share, I guess, but just to one of your bench Pokemon, which is nice. And it also has the attack Hydro Pump, which is just, it's Hydro Pump. It's been around forever. It does the same thing all the time. But still, I think this could open the door to maybe a more single prize focused version of Baxcalibur, where maybe you play like one Chien-Pao and you just play like Veluzas. And yeah, just Veluzas, Baxcaliburs, maybe even stuff like the Palafin, for example. You could play this, of course, with like Radiant Greninja. You'd be silly not to. So, you could charge up Radiant Greninja in one go with Cut for the Job. So, very strong card, to be honest, in a single price focus setting. This is obviously going to be really solid in GLC, in Blastoise and Baxcalibur variants. But yeah, seems like a very playable card, to be honest, which is nice to see from the single price front of things. Then we see a Swablu Altera line, again with the art rares. Altera EX has the ability Humming Heal, which in all honesty isn't that bad, but at the same time, I don't think the ability is great. Healing 20 from each of your Pokemon, in theory, sounds pretty good because, if you get maybe 2 or 3 of these in play, you could be healing 60 from everything, which sounds great, but realistically, your opponent is only going to need to hit one of your Pokemon once or twice. Like, there's just so many decks in Standard right now that have 1-hit KO potential or do too much damage, really, for this ability to be super relevant. Yes, maybe in the late game when there's like 3 or 4 Altera in play and you get like a Zork involved or something weird and you're healing like 80 damage a turn. That could be relevant because you could start bouncing around between Alterias and getting cooks and potions involved and stuff. But in all honesty, I don't think this ability is super strong, at least not in the early game. And then the attack Light Pulse for 1 water and a metal does 140, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to his Pokemon. So you can just basically ignore stuff like special conditions or stuff that would discard energy, I guess. But yeah, it's not the worst card ever, but certainly not the best EX that we've seen from the set by a long way, I would say. Then we see a bunch of new Mouse, one with Free Retreat, which is quite nice, and a Mouse Hold EX, which says, if its Pokemon is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack, you get to put 3 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon for each of your Mouse and Mouse Hold in play, including Mouse Hold EX, which is really nice, to be honest. It's a really nice effect. Unfortunately, however, Mouse Hold EX only has 230 HP and is only doing 120 damage. So Yeah, nothing super great there. I think this card is very fun. I think it'll be very cool, but I don't think it'll be very competitive because, even if you get like Zork involved, the most you're ever doing with this ability is 120, which, in all honesty, isn't super great. I don't think this is super great. Like, yeah, you're still 2 carrying everything thanks to the ability with Greedy Fangs, even just doing 120, but yeah, I don't think this card is fantastic. The fact that it has free retreat is nice because at least you can bounce between different mouse holds and force your opponent to take more damage that way. But yeah, and I guess double turbo Cheryl, but you're doing even less damage at that point. Could be a fun card, honestly, but don't think it's going to be super great. But then if we go down here, we see some new Flittles, which are nice to see, I guess, and a new Espathra, which has an amazing art rare, very Dune-esque. But the ability All Seeing is pretty decent, to be fair. When it evolves from Frittle, it basically just gets immunity from damage for a turn, which is nice. And then the attack Glitterize does 70 damage, and if you have Tulip in your discard pile, this attack does 70 more damage. So basically, this deck is kind of just saying, right, I'm just going to evolve my Flittles one at a time, and hope my opponent doesn't have any good sniping options. I guess we have like Manaphy and Jirachi, so it's not too bad. But you just really want to force your opponent to gust every turn in order to, at least damage your Spathras, which is nice. But even all that aside, and even if you get like a Tulip and discard pile, and even if you get 2 Psychic Energy on a Spathra, you're still only doing 140, which isn't going to 2-KO everything right now. So yeah, it seems a bit weak, unfortunately, but we do have some pretty decent cards in honesty. Countercatcher is, of course, a great reprint. I was actually working on the top 10 cards I'd like to see reprinted. I was going to be one of those YouTubers that did that, but Countercatcher was actually on the top 3. So something to bear in mind because I do really like this card and I'm glad that it's getting a reprint. I'm all for new card designs and everything, but there is certain cards from Expanded that I think should come back, and Countercatcher was definitely one of them. So, very strong card, just means stuff like Quad Arvin is even more viable now because you're not torn between choosing between like a boss or an Arvin. You can just go for Arvin, get a tool card while also getting your Gust, or if you've got Gust in hand, then that's fine. It also means that if you're playing like a single prize deck, then you can use your Gust effect in the form of this item, and then also play something like a Cynthia's Ambition. So, super strong combo. I think this could easily be a 1 of or a 2 of in a lot of decks. So, glad to see that. We also have this item Snorlax Doll, which is a really cool card. In all fairness, I think it's a really cool card design, but sadly, I don't think it will be super great. It's a 120 HP item card that acts as a Pokemon, so it's like Lily's Pokédoll, in that it doesn't give up a prize, which is nice. But the effect on the first group of text is basically saying that the only way you can ever play this down from your hand is if it's in your starting hand. Then you put it as, face down as a 120 HP colorless Pokemon, as if we are setting up to play. So I'm not sure if this means that it's just the active spot, or if if you had like 4 of these in your opening hand. I don't know how likely that ever is, but say you had more than one in theory. I would like to know what the ruling is here. Like, can you put multiple of these from your hand onto the bench and stuff, or is it just the one? But it would be nice if you could do that. Otherwise, you'd have to play 4 of these probably just to try and hit 1 on the first turn of the game. There has been cards that have had this effect and have been decent. Like the Talonflame from Steam Siege was actually a really good card. But, Luxray from Crown Zenith hasn't really seen any play outside of Japan. So it's a very hit or miss effect. But I do like this card. It's at least creative. I'm glad they're trying something new, I guess, instead of, just reprinting Substitute Doll. But yeah, it's a cool card overall and something nice to see. But yeah, as for the reveals overall, definitely some fun playable cards. It just feels like a breath of fresh air compared to how really bad Obsidian Flames was. Like, I think it's a known fact at this point just how bad that set was. Just, even like the EX that were in Starter EX cards like Tranitar, Vespiquen, Toadscroll, all of which were pretty meh, to be honest. So seeing many more playable cards, like the Veluza, the Golisopod, in all honesty, and Armarouge is just really refreshing. So yeah, it's been Emma Power. Thank you for watching. What's your favorite new EX card revealed, of course? And yeah, thank you for watching.